Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine trying to reconstruct, nearly 600 years of history. You've got shifting power, diverse peoples, evolving cultures, and all you have, really, are these fragmented clues. And the timeline, well, it feels more like a patchwork quilt than some neat chronometer, right? That's
Yeah.
precisely the fascinating yet challenging journey we're embarking on in this deep dive.
Indeed. And our mission today is really to sift through the historical sources we have. Specifically, we're looking at excerpts from D R Regmi's History of Medieval Nepal, Chapter 2, Sources for the Early Medieval History of Nepal.
Mhm.
We want to try and extract those crucial insights that, illuminate this really foundational era for Nepal. It's about moving beyond just listing dates and names. Hopefully, you'll gain a kind of shortcut to understanding how medieval Nepal, roughly 879 AD to 1482 AD, how it became what it is today, shaped by forces that, while are still resonating culturally, socially.
And trust me, it's not as straightforward as reading a textbook chapter. Not at all. We're dealing with this extensive period, almost 6 centuries. From 879 AD, right up to 1482 AD, that date marks the end of the reign of Yaxamala, as the source mentions. And the sources, they hint at a time that led to Nepal being, quote, divided, and also wallowing in unrest and internecine circumstances. That's a direct quote. So what makes understanding this particular slice of history such a complex puzzle? And, what kinds of sources are we actually relying on to try and solve it? It really does feel like a detective story sometimes. Okay, so building on that initial sense of, division and unrest, let's turn to the sheer political turbulence that's hinted at. When we look at this nearly 600-year period, 879 to 1482 AD, the source mentions half a dozen dynasties in succession in varied circumstances. Wow, that sounds like a lot of moving parts, almost like a recipe for, well, profound instability. What is that kind of dynastic churn, that constant change at the top? What does it imply for stability and for the everyday life of people in medieval Nepal? Especially, maybe, for those living far from the centers of power.
Yes, that phrase, half a dozen dynasties in succession over about 600 years, it points directly to a profound lack of consistent central authority, and crucially, maybe a lack of institutionalized, stable succession processes. This isn't just some political footnote. It would have permeated almost every aspect of life. Imagine the constant jostling for power, right? The ephemeral alliances, the cycles of intrigue that must have characterized the courts. For the common person, well, a new ruling family every century or so, maybe even more frequently, that could mean continuous shifts in, say, taxation policies, land ownership, even the legal frameworks governing their daily
So
lives.
constant uncertainty,
Yeah,
basically.
pretty much. And think about infrastructure projects. If they were even initiated, building roads, irrigation canals, temples, perhaps, they might have just been abandoned midway through if the dynasty changed and, priorities shifted. Or the treasury funds simply dried up or were redirected. Trade routes could become insecure because of this fragmented control. Or you might get local strongmen rising up, imposing their own tolls and regulations. That makes commerce really unpredictable, risky. It just fosters an environment of, well, perpetual uncertainty.
So we're not just talking about changes at the very top, but a kind of ripple effect touching everything, security, economy. Did these frequent power shifts also affect things like, say, religious practices? Or the development of art and literature? And you mentioned people far from the center. Would a farmer in a remote village feel the change as profoundly as someone living closer to the capital? Or would local structures maybe absorb some of that shock?
That's a really crucial distinction and a perceptive question. Yes. While the capital might have seen constant upheaval, life in the villages, perhaps it developed a degree of self-sufficiency. Local communities might have relied more heavily on their own governing councils or maybe religious leaders for stability, especially when that central authority was so fragmented or, frankly, unreliable. You could even see this as a kind of coping mechanism against the unpredictable nature of dynastic rule.
Makes sense. A way to maintain some continuity locally.
Exactly. Now, for the development of art and literature, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Periods of stability under a patronizing monarch, they often lead to artistic flourishing. That's true. However, frequent changes could also mean a diversification of artistic styles. Different ruling families might bring their own aesthetic preferences or patronize different schools of thought, different artists, religious practices. Well, they might have seen shifts in patronage, perhaps favoring certain sects or temples over others. But the deeply ingrained nature of faith, often provides its own continuity amidst political change.
So the core beliefs might remain, even if the official favor shifts.
Precisely. And the collective memory in such an environment, It might not have been one of a unified, glorious national past. It might have been more like a series of disconnected, turbulent reigns, remembered more for specific, localized hardships or triumphs. Oral traditions, rather than official written histories, might have been more dominant in preserving these fragmented memories, because the very continuity of official record-keeping would have been profoundly challenged by all these dynastic disruptions. And this brings us to another fundamental challenge for historians. How do they even begin to piece together a chronology for such a tumultuous ancient period? The source points to colophon data as crucial. What's fascinating here is that while a chronology does exist from 998 AD onwards, it's described as, quote, not wholly ascertained, and also comparatively much regular, which sounds a bit contradictory at first glance.
Right, colophon data, our historical anchor here. Okay, for listeners who might not be, steeped in historical research methods, what exactly is a colophon? Why is it so vital when other records are scarce or unreliable? It almost sounds like finding a needle in a haystack, but a really important needle.
Haha, yes, a vital needle. A colophon, simply put, is a note made by a scribe, often at the very end of the manuscript. Think of it as maybe the medieval equivalent of a production note, or like the metadata tag on an old digital file almost. It often includes crucial information like the date the manuscript was copied, sometimes the name of the scribe, the place where it was copied, maybe even the patron who commissioned it. In periods where official state records, royal chronicles, comprehensive administrative documents, where those are either non-existent or just haven't survived the ravages of time, colophons become incredibly valuable primary sources. They're gold dust, really.
Because they're contemporary evidence from the actual time.
Exactly. They provide direct contemporary evidence of specific dates and locations. They act as chronological milestones in what might otherwise be a historical dark age where we have very little solid ground to stand on. They are like finding, I don't know, time-stamped postcards from the past, each one a tiny beacon in the fog.
That makes profound sense. It sounds like truly brilliant, painstaking work to transform these sort of marginal notes into the bedrock of our understanding. But then the source adds this intriguing caveat. The chronology from 998 AD onwards is not wholly ascertained, yet comparatively much regular. What's the nuance there? If it's not wholly ascertained, does that mean there are still gaps or uncertainties despite this relative regularity?
Precisely. Not wholly ascertained means that while we have a general framework, it's not a perfectly continuous or fully verified sequence of events and reigns. There might be periods where the exact sequence of rulers is still debated by historians, or precise regnal dates are missing, or maybe they're contradictory across different colophons you find. It's like having most of the dots connected on a timeline, but some lines are still dashed, and a few dots are simply absent.
Okay, so regular doesn't mean perfect.
Exactly. The comparatively much regular part suggests that relative to the period before 998 AD, the information becomes more consistent and reliable. We move from near total obscurity to something historians can genuinely work with. But it's still far from a complete, unchallenged record you might find in, say, perfectly preserved royal archives elsewhere. And this really challenges the traditional idea of historical facts as these immutable truths. Instead, it highlights history as an ongoing process of interpretation and refinement. Scholars are constantly cross-referencing these colophons with other fragments, maybe inscriptions on monuments, perhaps local legends, to construct the most plausible timeline. It's truly a collaborative and sometimes incredibly painstaking effort, pushing the boundaries of what we can definitively claim to know about the past.
And the sources do give us some concrete examples of these anchor points, which is really helpful, like those lighthouses you mentioned. We hear about the first ascertained reign dated to NS 40, which translates to 920 AD from a colophon. And then an inscription's regnal date of NS 132, or June 1012 AD. These feel like crucial pieces of the puzzle. And just to clarify for everyone, NS, or Nepal Sambat, that's Nepal's unique indigenous calendar system, right? It started centuries after the Gregorian calendar. So when we mention NS 40 equaling 920 AD, we're bridging between two very different ways of marking time. It shows how local traditions intersected with broader historical dating.
Absolutely pivotal points. These specific dates are like, well, irrefutable points in time that historians can build around. The colophon from 920 AD establishes a verified starting point for a discernible reign. It gives a fixed reference in that early medieval period. And the inscription from 1012 AD provides another fixed point, likely tied to a specific event, maybe a decree or a significant construction during a ruler's tenure. Without these, the entire chronology would be far more speculative, just a murky, undated expanse. These are the bedrock upon which that more regular, albeit not wholly ascertained, timeline from 998 AD onwards is constructed. They allow historians to anchor the relative sequence of events to absolute time markers. But even with these, the sources reveal a deeper puzzle, especially when it comes to understanding who ruled and, critically, how power was transferred.
Okay, so we have some dates we can anchor ourselves a bit. But then we hit another wall. The source says, the problem of setting right the genealogy is not as simple as it may appear. Huh. Before NS 118, there's apparently an unascertained list of names with a gap at frequent intervals. What does the absence of a clear family tree or these genealogical gaps, what does it actually mean for understanding power and succession in medieval Nepal? Sounds like a historian's nightmare.
Oh, it truly is a significant hurdle. The importance of genealogy and historical power structures, especially in monarchical systems, it really can't be overstated. A clear lineage, it provides legitimacy to rulers. You rule because you are the rightful heir, born into the revered ruling family, that sort of thing. It also dictates the line of succession, at least theoretically, preventing or minimizing disputes, ensuring a smooth transfer of power. And furthermore, tracing family trees allows historians to understand really complex political dynamics. Alliances forged through marriage between ruling houses, for instance, or the spread of influence through kin networks, the continuity of policies or cultural practices across generations. It's how we often understand the very fabric of power.
And if that's all missing, or just fragmented, what's the consequence beyond just making a historian's job incredibly difficult? What did it mean on the ground?
Well, if you have an unascertained list of names, with frequent gaps, as the source states for the period before NS 118, it means exactly that. The mechanisms of power become incredibly opaque and likely highly unstable. We don't know if these were direct father-to-son successions. We don't know if there were periods of regency, maybe by a queen or a council, or if power frequently changed hands through coups, usurpations, the rise of new strongmen from outside the established lines. This absence of a clear family tree implies a highly fluid system, possibly contested, inherently unstable system of rule. It means the people couldn't necessarily predict who their ruler would be next or what their policies might entail.
Which links back to that constant uncertainty we talked about earlier.
Exactly. This uncertainty could manifest as internal power struggles, shifting loyalties among local elites, and just a general state of political flux that directly contributes to the unrest and internecine circumstances mentioned right at the beginning. When legitimacy isn't clear and succession is fragmented, it creates a constant opportunity for contenders to emerge, leading to internal conflicts and probably a cycle of short, volatile reigns. It suggests a system where maybe brute force or clever political maneuvering might have been more effective than inherited right for quite some time, making governance less about stable administration and perhaps more about sheer survival for the ruling elite.
So this lack of clear lineage could very well be a major contributing factor, maybe even a root cause, of that unrest and internecine circumstances the source highlighted. It sounds like fertile ground for power struggles if the rules of succession weren't well defined or maybe universally accepted. And understanding these genealogical gaps isn't just some dry academic exercise, is it? For you, our listener, it fundamentally changes how we view history. It's not some neatly packaged story just waiting to be discovered. It's more like a complex mosaic where entire pieces are missing. And historians become almost like forensic detectives, meticulously piecing together fragments to reconstruct what might have happened. This really deepens our appreciation for the facts we think we know. It reveals them as carefully constructed interpretations based on limited evidence. It's a testament to human ingenuity, really, both in living through such times and in us trying to understand the past now. Okay, so building on that understanding of the, well, often unstable political landscape, let's pivot now to the very people themselves. Who were they?
The sources reveal that the local population was overwhelmed and merged with the immigrants who had concurrently imposed their dialect. Wow, that sounds like a massive demographic shift, creating a truly dynamic culture, presumably. But what does overwhelmed really imply here? About the scale of these migrations into the Nepal Valley, was that a gradual trickle or more like a flood?
Yeah, the term overwhelmed is very telling, isn't it? It strongly suggests that these weren't just small trickles of new arrivals. We're likely talking about a significant influx of people, a scale large enough to profoundly impact and even, well, subsume the existing local population. It implies something closer to a flood, or at least a substantial wave, rather than just gradual integration over a very long time. This wasn't merely a process where newcomers slowly adopted the local ways. Not at all. Instead, it indicates that the immigrants arrived in such numbers, or perhaps with such influence, that they could not only merge with the local populace, but also, crucially, impose their dialect and their cultural markers. This implies a powerful, perhaps even dominant wave of new groups that fundamentally reshaped the social and cultural landscape of the Nepal Valley. It really sets the stage for a truly composite and dynamic culture, where different traditions didn't just coexist side by side, but actively blended. Often, it seems, with the incoming cultures establishing a new dominant influence, at least initially.
And the sources highlight the Kireta tribes as being central to this initial powerful wave, right? Noting that they settled and their language spoke had become the common medium for all the peoples of the Nepal Valley, but not until the local dialect had greatly influenced it. So a linguistic give and take, not just a one-way imposition. That's interesting. And the sources also give us some broader context for the Kiretas themselves, where they came from.
Indeed. The Kiretas weren't just some localized group within Nepal. Their story is part of a much larger regional migration pattern, it seems. The source mentions they were originally from East India, and their expansion saw them move into the East Gangetic Plain. Then, crucially, they were apparently pushed into the hilly area by Aryans. This historical sweep provides vital context. It shows their arrival in Nepal wasn't an isolated event, but part of a dynamic, often conflict-driven, regional migratory pattern. The sources describe them as a vigorous race who dominated the environment and introduced novel dominant features.
Which paints a vivid picture, doesn't it? A resilient, adaptable, culturally impactful group, not just passive migrants.
Exactly. They actively shaped the environment they settled in. They brought new customs, perhaps new agricultural techniques, maybe forms of governance or social structures, things that left an indelible mark on Nepal. And their language becoming the common medium, even with that noted local influence, it speaks volumes about their numerical strength or perhaps their cultural assertiveness in establishing a linguistic foundation for the valley. It shows a powerful synthesis happening, not just a simple adoption or replacement. And what's fascinating here is how these various waves of people contributed to Nepal's unique identity. Because beyond the Kiretas, the source says many other immigrants, like the Lich Havis and Mallas, also arrived. So this wasn't a one-off event. It was a continuous process of layering, adding new dimensions to the valley's demographic and cultural makeup over time. And it wasn't just about different tribes arriving. We see profound social stratification being reshaped too.
So the Nepal Valley essentially became a kind of melting pot, maybe, or perhaps more accurately, a continuously evolving crossroads for various groups coming from different directions. How did that geographical position contribute to this constant influx?
That's precisely it. The source describes the valley as being situated in between the Khasa and Kireta settlers. That underscores its unique geographical position as a natural corridor and meeting point for diverse populations moving through the Himalayan foothills. But the layering goes deeper than just different tribal groups arriving. The sources explicitly state that Aryans, primarily priest and warrior classes, married into non-Aryan families. This led apparently to Brahmins and Kshatriyas becoming deviationist from stringent scriptures.
Okay, deviationist. That's incredibly significant, isn't it? In classical Hindu society, especially for high-caste Brahmins and Kshatriyas, adherence to scriptural dictates, particularly around purity and strict endogamy, marrying only within one's own caste, was incredibly stringent. So when the sources tell us these groups became deviationist in Nepal by marrying into non-Aryan families, that's not just a minor adjustment. What does that signal about the local culture's power, its ability to adapt even rigid external social rules?
It's a critical point. It reveals the pragmatic and adaptive nature of society in medieval Nepal. For high caste groups migrating from the plains, maintaining ritual purity through strict adherence to scriptural dictates was paramount. Intermarriage with lower or non-Aryan castes was typically prohibited or, at the very least, severely frowned upon. So their deviation in Nepal indicates a powerful local culture, one that perhaps prioritized integration and local realities over strict scriptural orthodoxy imported from the Gangetic Plains. It suggests that the social norms of the valley may be driven by the necessity of coexisting and forming alliances in this diverse environment, were strong enough to modify even deeply ingrained religious and social practices.
So it wasn't just a compromise, but an active reshaping of norms.
It seems so. The source further highlights this by noting that a second-rank Kasaita marriage was considered the highest status, and that Gangetic Plains castes also mingled. This further blurred the lines of rigid social hierarchies. It all points to a really fluid social landscape where existing hierarchies were renegotiated and new ones emerged through intermarriage and cultural negotiation. reflecting the unique synthesis happening in the valley.
And the sources even trace some of the earliest layers of this human tapestry, right?
Yeah.
Going back even further than the Kiratas and Aryans.
Yes, exactly. The earliest settlers are identified as Mundas, Kols, and Phils from the Chotanagpur region in South Bihar, followed apparently by Dravidians as a second wave. This demonstrates that the valley was a destination for migration long before the Kiratas and Aryans we often focus on. It shows a truly multi-layered history of human settlement. And critically, the source adds that while Aryans might have penetrated the valley, they were, quote, literally swamped by the Kiratas at a later stage.
Literally swamped. That paints a vivid picture.
It does. It suggests not a single origin or a simple linear progression, but successive influences, each leaving its mark. Sometimes one wave overshadowed previous ones, sometimes it was absorbed, but always contributing to the rich, layered human landscape of Nepal. It's a dynamic story of constant movement, interaction, transformation, where no single group held uncontested dominion for long, and their interactions formed something entirely new.
So what does this all mean, then, for the people of Nepal? The source states that no one settler group could preserve its ethnic isolation, resulting in a composite race. Yet it also says it's impossible to establish exactly what degree of intermixture had occurred. Quote, "This feels like a real aha moment. The exact recipe might be lost to time, but the outcome, this blend, is clear." What does the idea of an integrated race personality imply about this unique cultural blend? How did it come to define a Nepalese identity?
It truly is an aha moment, I agree, because it gets to the very heart of identity formation, not just in Nepal, but, universally. While the scientific or anthropological tools of the time might have struggled to quantify the precise degree of intermixture, meaning we can't say exactly what percentage of Kirata, Aryan, or other ancestry makes up the modern Nepali population, the cultural and genetic amalgamation is presented by the source as undeniable. The outcome is a composite race. Now, the concept of an integrated race personality that goes beyond mere physical or genetic blending, it suggests that despite the diverse origins, a distinct shared cultural identity emerged, one that was more than just the sum of its parts.
A new whole, essentially.
Exactly. This identity transcended the original distinct groups, reflecting a successful and unique synthesis of their traditions, beliefs, ways of life. It implies that these diverse threads were not simply laid side by side like stripes on a flag, but they were woven together so tightly over centuries that they formed a new, cohesive fabric. Think of it like a beautiful tapestry woven from threads of different colors and textures, where the individual threads are maybe no longer distinct but have blended to create an entirely new pattern and texture that is uniquely its own.
That's a powerful idea. It sounds like the very concept of Nepalese identity, particularly in the valley, is fundamentally rooted in this profound history of mixing and cultural exchange.
Exactly. And for you, our listener, this really challenges the simplistic, often dangerous notion of pure ethnic identities, a concept that's often been misused throughout history, hasn't it? Instead, it highlights how historical interactions, migrations, conflicts, alliances, trade, just daily life, create complex, layered populations. It's a powerful reminder that all societies, really, to varying degrees, are products of constant movement and mixing. Human history isn't static. It's a testament to adaptability, to fusion, and to the continuous evolution of cultures and peoples. Medieval Nepal offers a really compelling illustration of this universal truth, showing how new identities are forged in the crucible of diverse human interaction. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the sources reveal something quite profound, that the culture produced in this period had surely produced the greatest impact on the life and society of the people of the country. Now, that's not just a casual observation. It's a definitive statement about the foundational nature of this era's developments. This impact, the source says, accounts for two key things. First, the prevalence of Sanskrit Buddhism. And second, the comprehensive influence of Sanskrit in Newari. And it concludes that both have shaped the Valley of Nepal culturally what it is today.
Okay, greatest impact. That sounds incredibly significant. It's not just about, a few religious trends or linguistic quirks. It sounds like these intertwined forces created the very fabric of Nepali society in the valley. What does greatest impact really signify about the depth of this influence? Are we talking art, philosophy, daily life, social norms, maybe even economic structures?
Yes, I think it implies all of that and more. When the source speaks of the greatest impact, it points to a profound shaping of the very bedrock of Nepali civilization in the valley. Think about Sanskrit Buddhism. It isn't just a religion in isolation. It implies a complex philosophical system that permeated intellectual life, Artistic traditions manifest in intricate architecture, sculpture, Thangka paintings, ethical frameworks that guided social conduct, ritual practices that permeated daily life. It would have influenced everything from the calendar they used to ceremonies marking birth, marriage, death, even the design of the urban landscape with its characteristic stupas and chaitas.
So deeply embedded in society.
Absolutely. And similarly, the comprehensive influence of Sanskrit in Newari indicates that this wasn't just about borrowing a few words. It implies that Sanskrit, this language of high culture, sophisticated learning, profound religious texts, infused the vernacular language spoken by the masses, Newari. This linguistic absorption would have shaped the very way people thought, expressed themselves, structured their understanding of the world. So yes, it encompasses arts, philosophy, social norms, maybe legal traditions, daily life, effectively creating the distinct cultural identity of the Nepal Valley that, in many ways, endures to this day. It suggests that these two forces, Buddhism expressed through Sanskrit and Newari infused with Sanskrit, were fundamental pillars, foundational to the unique character of the region.
Now let's pivot to something truly fascinating you just touched on, the linguistic landscape itself. Our sources tell us that Newari was the language spoken by the people of the Nepal Valley in the 14th century. Even though, as you mentioned, earlier records were primarily in Sanskrit, it seems like this dual linguistic system existed, with Sanskrit holding a kind of privileged position. How did these two languages coexist and influence each other without one just completely eclipsing the other? It sounds like a really delicate balance.
It does, doesn't it? The coexistence of Newari as the vibrant spoken language and Sanskrit as the language of official records and inscriptions. It paints a clear picture of a sophisticated two-tiered linguistic system. Sanskrit, as the official language used for decrees, charters, and indeed religious texts, clearly held a privileged position. This suggests it was the language of power, administration, elite scholarship, high religious discourse, likely understood primarily by the ruling elite, scholars, the priestly class. Meanwhile, the mass of the people, the source says, spoke Newari, indicating it was the vernacular, the language of everyday life, commerce, local communication. It was the language in which families spoke, markets haggled, local stories were told. The living language.
So there must have been different levels of literacy then, or maybe just access to knowledge depending on which language you spoke or understood.
Yeah.
And how did that shape society? Did it create divisions?
Precisely. This kind of duality often reflects social stratification. Access to Sanskrit would likely have been limited to a smaller, educated class, perhaps those associated with religious institutions, royal courts, or maybe specific merchant guilds involved in broader trade. And this created a distinct intellectual and cultural environment, where classical learning, preserved and transmitted through Sanskrit texts, existed alongside and deeply interacted with vibrant vernacular expression in Newari. But the influence wouldn't have been just one-sided, flowing from Sanskrit down. While Sanskrit was the official language and provided a vast lexicon, the necessity of communication with the general populace would have meant that official decrees, religious teachings, even complex philosophical ideas, eventually they needed to be translated, interpreted, or communicated in Newari. This leads to a constant interplay and mutual influence between the two languages. This linguistic environment would have been a dynamic space where the classical met the practical, giving rise to unique forms of expression and thought, enabling a blend of high culture with popular understanding. And what's truly fascinating here is the very nature of Newari itself. The source describes it as peculiarly evolved in its own way. It belongs, linguistically, to the Tibeto-Burma origin family, yet it was extremely influenced by Sanskrit. So much so that the source estimates 50% of its vocabulary either adopted or derived from Sanskrit. That's huge. And compounding this, it apparently even has a monosyllabic etymology, with all derivatives in monosyllabic form. What does this tell us about the deep linguistic synthesis happening in the valley?
Okay, monosyllabic etymology. That sounds quite technical. Can you break that down for us in a maybe more relatable way? What does it mean for all derivatives to be in monosyllabic form, especially when you compare it to a language like Sanskrit, which has many long words?
Certainly. To put it simply, monosyllabic etymology means that the fundamental building blocks, the core roots of words in Newari, are typically single syllables. Imagine the construction of a language. In English, or particularly in Sanskrit, we often stack syllables together. We add prefixes, suffixes, we inflect words to change their meaning, creating long, flowing polysyllabic words. Think understanding or philosophical. But for Newari, the source indicates that even when words are derived or formed from these basic roots, they maintain a fundamental connection to that single-syllable origin. Think of it maybe like a language built from elegantly precise single-note musical phrases rather than long, flowing melodic lines. It gives Newari a distinct, maybe almost rhythmic quality that sets it apart structurally.
So Newari is a language that fundamentally built differently from Sanskrit, these crisp single-syllable roots, yet it's borrowed half its words from Sanskrit. That's a massive, almost paradoxical blend, isn't it? What does this linguistic fusion tell us about the broader cultural landscape?
Exactly. It's quite remarkable. This hybrid nature of Newari is a powerful linguistic testament to the profound cultural fusion we've been discussing throughout this deep dive. It's not just a casual borrowing of a few words here and there. 50% of its vocabulary being adopted or derived from Sanskrit indicates a massive, deep absorption. This points to centuries of intimate contact, not just between the people speaking these languages, but between the very conceptual frameworks they represented. The fact that a Tibeto-Burman language with its own distinct monosyllabic structure could integrate such a vast amount of vocabulary from an Indo-Aryan language like Sanskrit. It speaks volumes about the intensity and depth of cultural exchange in the Nepal Valley. It signifies that the connection wasn't superficial. It shaped the very way concepts were formed, ideas were expressed, knowledge was transmitted in the Newari language. It makes Newari a unique linguistic fingerprint of Nepal's syncretic history, truly embodying the idea of a cultural crossroads where two distinct linguistic traditions met, intertwined, and created something entirely new and unique. It's a living monument to cultural fusion.
That's a fantastic insight into Newari. It really brings that fusion to life. And continuing this thread of continuous influence, the source also mentions that the valley came to be occasionally influenced by Brahmanical culture at many stages of contacts with the outside world, end quote. This suggests, again, a continuous process rather than just a one-time event of cultural absorption, extending beyond those initial major migration waves we discussed.
Yes, and this is a crucial distinction. It counters any idea that the cultural shaping of Nepal was a singular event, tied only to the initial large-scale migrations of, say, the Kiratas or the early Aryans. Instead, it highlights an ongoing dynamic process of cultural absorption and adaptation. Many stages of contacts with the outside world implies continuous trade networks, diplomatic exchanges, intellectual discourse, maybe religious pilgrimages, and smaller, perhaps less documented population movements over centuries. These constant interactions would have continuously refreshed and blended the cultural landscape of the valley, introducing new ideas, practices, perspectives, and allowing Brahmanical traditions, for example, to seep in, not just as a foundational layer, but as a recurring influence that interacted with the existing cultural fabric.
So it's not a static picture at all, but a continuously evolving canvas, even after those initial big waves of settlement had occurred. It paints a picture of Nepal, or at least the valley, as a perpetually permeable cultural space.
Precisely. This means that Brahmanical culture, or indeed any other external influence, wasn't just a single historical event locked in the past. It was an element that continually interacted with and reshaped the existing cultural fabric over centuries. And this dynamic, ever-evolving cultural landscape reminds you, our listener, that identities are not static endpoints. They're ongoing journeys shaped by countless historical interactions. Cultures are rarely pure or unchanging. They are products of continuous dialogue, adaptation, and fusion with the outside world, making history a vibrant testament to human interconnectedness and creativity. It's a reminder that even today, cultures are constantly being reshaped by global interactions, much as Nepal's was in its medieval period. This raises an important question that, in many ways, sort of encapsulates all the complexities we've discussed. Given all this historical fragmentation, these layers of migration, the linguistic synthesis, what about the very name of the country itself? The sources tell us there's absolutely no evidence to accept Nepal as the original term. And apparently, in modern records, there's no instance of Nepal being employed as the name of the country. Yet Nepal is described as the ever-extant term. It's always been there. And the author asks pointedly, what really did give rise to this kind of name? Where did Nepal come from?
That's a profound mystery, isn't it? It seems that even something as fundamental as identity-defining as the name of a country is shrouded in this historical ambiguity. It's not just some minor detail. It's about the very core of national identity, you'd think.
Indeed. The ambiguity around the name Nepa versus Nepala really highlights how even the most fundamental identifying features can be shrouded in historical mystery and debate. The source is very direct. There's no evidence for Nepal being the original or widely used modern term for the country itself. Yet, Nepala has been consistently present across centuries in the records we do have. This underscores the challenges historians face when definitively tracing origins in such a layered history. It's a prime example of how even core identifiers can be subject to debate and lack definitive proof. Now, while various theories exist among scholars about the etymology of Nepala, perhaps linking it to an ancient tribe, a specific sage, or even a geographical feature, the source here emphasizes the absence of definitive historical evidence to prove any single origin. It remains an open question, prompting ongoing linguistic and historical inquiry.
So, if the precise origin of the name Nepala is unclear, how does that connect to the people who inhabit the land? The source mentions that the word Nuwar, referring to the primary inhabitants of the valley, had to be viewed in light of meaning attached to the country's name, Nepala or Napa. This suggests a deep, perhaps even etymological, link between the people and the land they inhabited, making their identity inextricably tied to the valley itself.
It absolutely does suggest that. This profound connection between the name of the country Nepala and the people, particularly the Newark community, implies a deep and organic link. It implies that the identity of the people, the Newars, who were the predominant inhabitants of the valley for centuries and the creators of so much of its unique culture, is inextricably tied to the land. Their very designation, Newar, likely stemming from the name of the valley, Nepala, the place they shaped and were shaped by. This isn't just a geographical descriptor, it's an identity marker, linking a composite people to a continuously evolving place. And the persistent question about the name's origin, it serves as a kind of microcosm for the entire deep dive we've undertaken today. It reflects the complex tapestry of medieval Nepal, where origins are often layered, debated, elusive. Yet they collectively weave together to create a distinct and enduring identity. It encapsulates the very essence of our discussion, how so much of this rich past has to be painstakingly reconstructed, and how even fundamental questions remain open to interpretation and further discovery, reminding us that history is a journey of continuous exploration, not just a destination of fixed facts. Hashtag tag tag outro.
So what does this all mean? Where does this leave us? We've taken a deep dive into nearly 600 years of medieval Nepal. We've looked at the profound challenges of, well, sometimes unreliable historical sources, those fragmented colophons, those frustrating genealogical gaps. We've traced the incredible story of its people, forged from wave after wave of migration, creating that composite race. We've seen the unique cultural synthesis that birthed a language like Newari, with its Tibeto-Burman roots just intricately intertwined with a massive Sanskrit vocabulary, and the prevalence of Sanskrit Buddhism that profoundly shaped the valley's art, philosophy, daily life. It's a powerful illustration, isn't it, of history as a dynamic, complex, and often elusive narrative, where direct answers are rare and nuanced interpretation is absolutely key.
Indeed. The true value here isn't just in knowing dates or names or even specific dynastic shifts, those are interesting. It's really in appreciating the intricate, often messy processes by which societies are truly built and identities are forged. Medieval Nepal teaches us that identity is rarely singular or static. It's a constantly evolving tapestry woven from diverse threads. Even when the original knots, the precise origins or degrees of intermixture are hard, maybe impossible to trace. It underscores that cultures are living entities, always in conversation with their past and their present, absorbing new influences while somehow retaining their unique essence.
And that leaves us with a truly provocative thought, perhaps. Considering the profound challenges historians face in painstakingly piecing together a rich past like medieval Nepal's from limited, sometimes contradictory sources, what does this tell us about the stories we tell ourselves about our own origins, as individuals, as communities, perhaps even as nations? And what about the historical gaps we might unknowingly, or maybe sometimes conveniently, fill with our own preferred narratives? It truly underscores the idea that history is a living, evolving interpretation. And understanding the past requires more than just memorizing facts. It demands critical engagement with the very process of discovery, and maybe a healthy appreciation for the beautiful uncertainties that make it all so compelling.